War is an algorithm. We will show its price. In August 2022, the price of natural gas on Europe's benchmark TTF market hit $2,127 per thousand cubic meters. Before the war, it traded at $250, an eightfold increase in 6 months. European governments spent $651 billion between September 2021 and January 2023 to shield consumers from the price shock. Germany alone allocated $158 billion. Italy and France each spent roughly $90 billion. That is $651 billion, not to fight a war, to survive one. This is what energy dependency looks like when it is weaponized. Not a single European soldier fired a shot. Not a single European factory was bombed. But the economic damage to Europe from the gas crisis rivals the direct costs of the conflict itself. We are going to calculate exactly how Russia used gas as an economic weapon and what it cost Europe to defend against it. The dependent architecture. Between 2018 and 2021, Russia supplied an average of over 40% of the European Union's total gas demand, according to IEA data. In some countries, the figure was much higher. Germany imported over 50% of its gas from Russia. Austria exceeded 80%. Bulgaria, Finland, and several Eastern European nations were above 60%. This dependency was not accidental. It was built over decades through a deliberate infrastructure strategy. Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were designed to bypass Ukraine and deliver gas directly from Russia to Germany, reducing transit dependency on any single country and concentrating the supply relationship between Moscow and Berlin. The infrastructure created a single choke point, and when that choke point was closed, Europe had no alternative that could replace the volume in the short term. The IEA warned about this vulnerability repeatedly. So did several European governments, notably Poland and the Baltic states, which lobbied against Nord Stream for years. The warnings were accurate. The timeline was wrong. No one predicted how quickly the dependency would be exploited. They said, Russian gas is a commercial relationship, not a geopolitical one. They got Gazprom began cutting supplies to Europe in the second half of 2021, months before the invasion of Ukraine. It drained 25% of European gas storage capacity that it controlled in advance of that winter. When the invasion came in February 2022, Russia cut 80 billion cubic meters per year of pipeline gas to Europe. By the end of 2022, Russian gas supplied less than a quarter of EU demand. By 2023, that figure dropped to roughly 10%. The speed of the crisis. Europe lost 150 billion cubic meters per year of Russian gas in 2022. The deficit was massive. The response had to be faster than any comparable energy transition in modern history. LNG imports surged by almost 60% on a yearly basis, according to CPR analysis. The share of LNG in total European gas supply jumped from an average of 20% between 2000 and 2019 to 53% in 2022. The United States became the EU's largest LNG supplier. Europe crowded out LNG imports to Latin America and Asia, reducing supply to those regions by 11 billion cubic meters and 24 billion cubic meters respectively. Gas consumption across the EU fell by more than 18% in 2022 and 2023 compared to the previous 5-year average. Industrial gas use fell by almost 25%. Demand destruction, the economic term for consumption that stops not because people choose to, but because prices are too high to sustain, became a defining feature of the European economy in 2022. Germany, which had no LNG terminal until the end of 2022, outlined plans to install several facilities within months. The Baker Institute at Rice University calculated that had Europe procured LNG under long-term contracts linked to U.S. Henry Hub prices, Rather than purchasing spot cargoes at European TTF-based prices, European customers could have saved over $100 billion in energy costs during the first 16 months after the invasion alone. The 651 Bunderidentheit. Billion defense. The fiscal cost of defending against the energy crisis was staggering. EU countries allocated over 651 billion between September 2021 and January 2023 to address the impact. This included energy tax abatements, price ceilings, and fiscal transfers to vulnerable populations. Germany spent $158 billion. Italy spent approximately $90 billion. France spent roughly $90 billion. These are not small numbers. They represent a transfer from taxpayers to energy consumers, a subsidy designed to prevent the economic and social consequences of energy poverty from destabilizing entire governments. EU natural gas subsidies had been stable at $7 to $10 billion annually before 2021. They increased fivefold in 2022. In 2023, support remained 4 times above pre-crisis levels. The fiscal cost of energy security, which had been negligible for decades, became one of the largest line items in European government budgets. The permanent restructuring. The crisis did not end, it transformed. By 2024, energy prices had moderated from their 2022 peaks, but the market structure had changed permanently. Europe is now fully exposed to global LNG supply and demand dynamics. It competes with Asian markets for spot natural gas volumes. Price volatility, which had been minimal under long-term pipeline contracts with Russia, is now a permanent feature of European energy markets. The Baker Institute described a structural gas Grand Canyon, a deficit of over 100 billion cubic meters annually that will persist for years. Russian pipeline gas still entered Europe in 2024, primarily through the Turk Stream pipeline to Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia. Russian LNG imports to the EU actually rose 18% in 2024, despite declared intentions to phase out Russian energy. The phase-out target is 2027. The reality is more complicated. Some countries depend on cheaper Russian gas and have limited alternatives. Others are importing Russian LNG while publicly denouncing Russian energy dependence. Industrial competitiveness has been permanently affected. European industrial gas deliveries, tracked across 14 major distributors, have not recovered to pre-crisis levels. The Baker Institute noted that usage in Belgium, France, Italy, the UK, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg sits at its lowest point in at least 5 years. This is not a temporary dip. It is a structural shift. Energy-intensive industries have either shut down, relocated, or permanently reduced output. The geopolitical feedback loop. Energy weaponization creates a feedback loop. The crisis forced Europe to spend $651 billion on defense measures. Those measures, LNG infrastructure, renewable energy expansion, demand reduction, will cost additional hundreds of billions over the coming decade. The IEA projects that renewable energy capacity additions will reduce gas demand going forward. But the transition is expensive. Meanwhile, Russia has redirected its energy exports. The Power of Siberia pipeline to China carries increasing volumes. Russian LNG finds buyers in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Russia forecasts that its energy export revenues will increase in 2024 despite Western sanctions. The sanctions reduced revenue. They did not eliminate it, and the cost of defending against the weaponization was borne entirely by Europe, not by Russia. This is the fundamental asymmetry. The weapon, cutting gas supply, cost Russia relatively little to deploy. The defense against it cost Europe $651 billion and counting. The attacker redirected its exports. The defender restructured its entire energy system. The cost ratio does not favor the defender. The final calculation. Russian gas supplied over 40% of EU demand between 2018 and 2021. The cut reduced that to 10% in 2023. European governments spent $651 billion defending against the price shock, more than the GDP of most individual EU member states. Industrial gas consumption has not recovered. Energy prices remain volatile. Europe is now permanently exposed to global LNG market dynamics. Russia's energy revenues, while reduced, remain substantial. The country has found alternative buyers. The sanctions have hurt. They have not stopped the revenue stream. Energy is not just a commodity. In the hands of a state willing to use it as a weapon, it becomes the most cost-effective instrument of economic coercion available. The cost of attacking is low. The cost of defending is measured in hundreds of billions. And the structural damage persists long after the crisis passes. Subscribe to What War Costs. The weapon that does not fire a single bullet is often the most expensive one to defend against.